Whole banquet hall went dead quiet the second my mother-in-law stood up, tapped her champagne flute with a butter knife, and announced to 40 people that her son was about to cover the entire bill as a little gift for her 60th birthday. $18,400. She said it loud, slow, savoring each syllable, watching my face the way a cat watches a bird. "Go on, sweetheart," she purred at my husband. "Show everyone what kind of man I raised." My husband beamed. He actually puffed his chest out like a kid in a school play, and he reached across the white tablecloth for my clutch, the little black one I'd carried all night, because of course the money was going to come from there. It always came from there. What he didn't know was that I'd swapped the card out 3 hours earlier, before we even left the house. What he didn't know was that the small leather wallet inside that clutch held something that was about to turn his mother's perfect evening into the worst night of her life. And honestly, I'd been waiting 6 years for this exact moment. Let me back up. My name is Dana. I'm 31. I'm a tax attorney at a firm in downtown Denver, and for 6 years I was married to a man named Brett who I genuinely believed was the love of my life. We met at a friend's wedding. He was funny, he was warm, he remembered the little things, and when he proposed 8 months later on a hiking trail above Boulder, I cried so hard I couldn't get the yes out. I thought I'd won the lottery. The first crack showed up about 4 months into the marriage, and it came in the shape of his mother. Her name is Carol. Picture a woman who has spent her entire adult life believing the world owes her something and the universe has personally failed to deliver. She'd raised Brett alone after his dad walked out, and she never let him forget it, not for one single day. Every conversation circled back to her sacrifice. Every holiday was a referendum on whether her children loved her enough, and love, in Carol's language, was spelled M-O-N-E-Y. It started small the way these things do, a loan of $2,000 so she could fix her transmission. Then her property taxes were late, and Brett's the only one with a real career. The rest of the family is broke. Then it was a new water heater, a vet bill for her ancient cat, a little vacation to Sedona, because the doctor said stress is killing me. Every time, Brett would come to me with those puppy eyes and say, "Babe, she's my mom. It's just this once. It's temporary." Temporary. I want that word carved on my tombstone, because I heard it roughly 400 times over 6 years. I should have put a stop to it the first year. I know that. The comments under the kind of life I lived would have shredded me for it. Why did you let this happen? Why didn't you walk? Are you stupid? And I get it, I really do. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about slowly being taken advantage of by someone you love. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens one reasonable-sounding request at a time, and each one is small enough that saying no would make you the villain. Carol was a master at it. She never demanded. She suggested. She sighed. She got teary. She mentioned how lonely she was, and somehow you ended up writing the check while thanking her for the opportunity. And there was one more reason I stayed. Brett's father, the one who'd walked out, had actually come back into the picture about 2 years before I met Brett, dying of pancreatic cancer. His name was Walter, and in the short window I knew him, before he passed, I loved that man like my own father. He was everything Carol wasn't. Humble, funny, full of regret about the years he'd wasted, and on one of his last good days, sitting on the porch of the hospice with a blanket over his knees, he took my hand and said, "Dana, my son is a good boy with a soft spine. His mother's gonna twist him in knots. Promise me you'll hold the family together when I'm gone." I promised. God help me. I promised a dying man, and that promise turned into a leash I let Carol hold for 6 years. So the money kept flowing. By year 3, I stopped seeing the bank statements Brett took care of. By year 4, I noticed we never seemed to get ahead, despite both of us earning well. By year 5, I found a credit card I didn't know existed, $11,000 deep, every charge traceable back to Carol's little emergencies. When I confronted Brett, he cried. He was always a crier, and swore it was the last time, that his mom had promised to pay it back, that I just didn't understand the bond between his son and his mother because my own family was, in his words, cold. That one stung. My family isn't cold. My family is normal. My family says I love you by showing up, not by handing over a debit card. The breaking point didn't come dramatically. It came on an ordinary Tuesday in March. I was working late on a client's estate filing. irony of ironies given what was coming, and I needed to pull a document from Brett's email because he'd forgotten to forward it. He'd left his laptop open, and there, sitting at the top of his inbox, was a message from his mother with the subject line, "The house plan. Delete after reading." I'm a tax attorney. You tell me to delete something. My hands move toward it before my brain even catches up. What I found in that email chain made my stomach drop through the floor. The house. Our house. The four-bedroom craftsman in Wash Park that I had bought me, with my money, with a down payment I'd saved since law school, in my name because we'd married after I closed on it. Brett had quietly added himself as a co-borrower through a refinance 2 years ago, something I'd signed during a chaotic week without reading closely enough, trusting him the way wives are supposed to trust husbands. And now he and his mother were planning to take out a $200,000 home equity loan against it. The money was earmarked, in black and white, to bail out a failing wellness spa that Carol wanted to open with Brett's name on the lease and her name on the profits. They were going to mortgage my home, the home Walter had sat in and called the prettiest little house in Denver, to fund Carol's vanity project. And the email made it crystal clear they were doing it quietly because, in Carol's exact words, Dana will make this difficult. Better to ask forgiveness. I sat in that dark home office for a long time. I didn't cry. That surprised me, honestly. I think I'd done all my crying in the years before in increments, and there was nothing left to spend. What was left was something cold and clear and very, very steady. I did not slam the laptop shut and scream. I didn't confront him that night. I'm a litigator by training. You don't tip your hand the moment you find the evidence. You build the file first. So I built the file. Over the next 8 weeks, I did what I do for a living, except this time, the client was me. I pulled 6 years of bank records. I documented every transfer, every loan, every charge, $140,000, all told, that had flowed from our accounts into Carol's bottomless hands. I quietly consulted a colleague in family law and a friend in real estate. I learned that because I'd bought the house before the marriage and could prove the down payment was separate property, and because the refinance had been pushed through under circumstances my colleague called concerning, I had far more standing than Brett's mother assumed. And then I made my moves, one careful piece at a time. I refinanced the house myself, in my name only, paying off the joint loan and removing Brett as co-borrower, which I could do because I qualified on my income alone and he'd never actually contributed to the mortgage. The equity Carol wanted to drain? I locked it up tight. I opened new accounts she and Brett didn't know existed. I moved my emergency savings, my investments, everything that was legally mine, somewhere their grasping fingers could never reach. I had my real estate friend draw up the paperwork. I had my family law colleague prep the divorce filing. Everything set in a drawer, executed and ready, waiting for the right moment. I wanted Brett to choose. I gave him one last chance, a real one. About 2 weeks before Carol's birthday dinner, I sat him down and asked him, gently, if there was anything he wanted to tell me about his mother and our finances. I gave him a wide-open door, and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "No, babe. Everything's good. You worry too much." That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. That was the moment the promise I'd made to a dying man finally released its grip, because I understood that holding this family together wasn't possible. You can't hold together something that's actively trying to rob you. So when Carol announced she wanted her 60th at Mizuna, one of the most expensive restaurants in Denver, the kind of place where the wine list reads like a hostage negotiation, and made it loudly clear that Brett will be treating, "Won't you, sweetheart?" I just smiled and said, "Of course." We wouldn't miss it, and I started planning the dinner I'd actually be hosting. The night of, the private dining room glittered. Carol had invited 40 people, her church friends, her book club, 2 cousins she normally couldn't stand, anyone who'd witness her triumph. She wore a gold dress and a smile like a trap. She'd ordered the tasting menu for the whole table, the wine pairings, 3 bottles of a Burgundy that ran $400 each, a tower of seafood that probably cost more than my first car. She wanted a spectacle. The final bill, when it landed in that little leather folder, came to $18,412. I'd done the math weeks ago. I knew almost exactly what it would be. So there we were, Carol on her feet, flute raised, voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Go on, sweetheart. Show everyone what kind of man I raised." Brett reached for my clutch, pulled out the wallet, slid out the card with a flourish, and handed it to the waiter with the kind of confidence only a man spending someone else's money can have. The waiter took it to the terminal by the host stand. I watched. I sipped my water. My heart was steady. The card came back declined. A little ripple went through the closest tables. Brett frowned, the way you do when the Wi-Fi cuts out, like reality itself had glitched. Try it again, he told the waiter, smiling, embarrassed but not yet afraid. The waiter tried again. Declined. A third time, the machine practically scolding him with its flat little beep. Declined. Carol's smile flickered. Brett, what is going on? He turned to me, and I'll never forget his face, because for the first time in 6 years, he looked at me like I was a stranger. He was a little bit scared of... Dana, what's wrong with the card? Nothing's wrong with it, I said, calm as still water. It just isn't connected to anything anymore. What does that mean? Carol's voice sharpened to a point. Brett, what does she mean? I set down my water glass. The room had gone quiet enough that I didn't have to raise my voice at all. That card draws from the joint account, I said. I closed it. There's nothing in it. There hasn't been for 2 weeks. Brett's mouth opened and closed. Why would you do that? How are we supposed to pay? And here is where I want you to picture it, because I'd rehearsed this in my head 100 times and the real thing was so much sweeter. I reached into my clutch, took out my phone, and started typing. What are you doing? Carol demanded. Calling someone who can sort this out, I said. I held the phone to my ear. It rang twice. A calm, professional voice answered, and the second Brett heard it bleed faintly from the speaker, he went gray because he recognized it. Marcus? I said. Yes, I'm ready. Go ahead and send everything now. Marcus is my attorney. Brett had met him exactly once, at a firm dinner, and had spent the whole night complaining afterward that he seemed smug. Carol had no idea who he was, but she could tell from her son's face that something was very wrong. Brett, she hissed. Who is that? What is she doing? Brett couldn't speak. I lowered the phone and looked at the woman who'd called me cold, who'd called my family broke, who'd planned to take my house and ask forgiveness later. Carol, I said, in about 30 seconds, your son is going to get an email. So are you, actually, since you were copied on the loan paperwork. I check your phones. Right on cue, Brett's phone buzzed in his jacket. Then it buzzed again. Carol fumbled in her gold clutch for hers. The first document, I said, is the divorce petition, filed this morning. You'll be served formally on Monday, but I figured tonight you'd want a preview. The 40 guests had stopped pretending not to listen. You could have heard a fork drop. The second document, I continued, is the refinance deed to the house in Wash Park. You'll notice your name isn't on it, Brett. It never really was, not in any way that matters. I removed you as a borrower 6 weeks ago. The home equity loan you and your mother were planning to take out to fund her spa? It can't happen. There's nothing to borrow against that belongs to either of you. The house is mine. It always was. Carol's face had gone from gold dress glowing to a mottled, furious red. You can't do that. Brett, tell her she can't do that. We had a plan. Oh, I know about the plan, I said. The delete after reading plan. I have the whole email chain. I have 6 years of bank records. $140,000, Carol. That's how much of my money you've taken since I made the mistake of marrying your son. I have a spreadsheet. I'm a tax attorney. We love a spreadsheet. A few people at the far end of the table actually laughed, then caught themselves. Brett finally found his voice, and it came out cracked and pleading. Dana, please, we can fix this. I only went along with it because Mom said she promised the spa would make money. She said you didn't need to be involved. I didn't think it would. You looked me in the eye 2 weeks ago, I said quietly, and told me everything was good, that I worried too much. You had a chance, Brett. You had 100 chances. You chose her every single time. Carol slammed her flute down so hard the stem snapped. After everything I've done for this family, you ungrateful little, what did you do exactly? I cut in, and for the first time my voice had an edge. Name one thing you did for me, not for yourself. Because from where I'm sitting, you spent 6 years treating me like an ATM with a wedding ring, and the one time I stopped letting you withdraw, you decided to just take the whole bank. The matra D had appeared at the edge of the room, hovering, sensing the catastrophe. "Is everything all right?" he asked carefully. "Almost," I said. I tapped my phone one more time, pulled up my own account, the one in my name, the one with my money, the money I'd worked for and saved and protected, and handed my personal card to him. The bill's $18,412. "Put it on this. I'll cover Carol's birthday. Consider it the last thing I ever pay for in this family." The card went through instantly. Approved. The little machine chirped pleasantly, like it was relieved. I stood, smoothed my dress, and picked up my clutch. Carol was sputtering. Brett had his head in his hands. 40 people were staring at me like I'd walked on water. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I told the table. "The food really was incredible." Then I added, to Carol specifically, "The locks on the house get changed tomorrow. I know you have a key. You won't need it anymore." Her cousin, one of the two she couldn't stand, raised a glass and said, loud enough for everyone, "To Dana." A handful of people drank to it. Carol looked like she might combust. Brett caught my wrist as I passed his chair. Not hard. Desperate. "Dana. 6 years. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked down at him, and I felt the strangest thing, not rage, not even satisfaction, just a deep, clean exhaustion finally lifting off my shoulders. "It meant everything to me," I said. "That's the part that hurts. I held this family together because I promised your father I would. But Walter never asked me to let it eat me alive. I think if he could see this, he'd tell me it's about time." Brett's face crumpled at his father's name. He let go of my wrist. I walked out through the dining room, past the church friends and the book club and the cousins, past the Mr. Dole, who gave me a small, respectful nod, past the wine tower that cost more than a car, and out into the Denver night. The air was cold and thin and clean, the way it gets in the mountains in spring, and I stood on the sidewalk for a second just breathing it in. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Field and served records confirmed. You did everything right. Get some sleep." I thought about Walter on that hospice porch, the blanket over his knees, telling me to hold the family together. I'd held it as long as I could, and then I'd done the only thing left to do, which was let it fall and walk out from under it before it crushed me. I didn't cry on that sidewalk. I'd been right. There really wasn't anything left to cry. What I felt, for the first time in 6 years, was light. Like I'd set down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my own body. I drove home to the prettiest little house in Denver. My house. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch where Walter once sat, and watched the lights come on across the park. For the first time in a very long time, every single thing I could see, I had earned. And nobody, not Carol, not Brett, not anyone, was ever going to take it from me again. The thing I keep coming back to, even now, is that nothing about that night at Mizuna happened by accident. Every piece of it was the harvest of seeds someone had planted years earlier. Carol spent 6 years teaching everyone around her that my money was hers to spend, and she never once stopped to wonder what it would cost her when the well ran dry. Brett spent 6 years choosing the easy yes over the hard truth, and a marriage can only absorb so many easy yeses before it simply stops holding water. They built the ending themselves, one small choice at a time, and all I really did was stop interrupting the pattern they'd set in motion. I used to think staying quiet made me kind. It took me a long time to understand the difference between kindness and fear dressed up as kindness. Real decency isn't writing the check every time someone cries. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for people is refuse to fund the worst version of themselves. I loved Walter, and I kept my promise to him longer than I should have. But I finally understood that holding a family together never meant letting it hold me down. Doing right by myself was not a betrayal of him. It was the one thing he actually wanted for me. What saved me, in the end, wasn't anger. Anger is loud and fast, and it makes you sloppy. What saved me was sitting in that dark office and choosing to think instead of scream. I pulled the records. I read the law I already knew. I built the file the same patient way I build one for a client, because the truth was always on my side and I just had to organize it well enough to be undeniable. Cleverness without patience would have tipped my hand. Patience without clarity would have kept me a victim. It was the two together that let me walk out of that restaurant with my house, my savings, and my name intact. And none of it would have mattered without the nerve to actually go through with it. I had the deed and the petition sitting in a drawer for 2 weeks, fully executed, and I'll be honest, there were nights I almost shredded them. Walking away from 6 years is terrifying even when you know you're right. But fear is just a feeling, and feelings are not instructions. I made myself sit in that banquet hall, smile, and let the card decline in front of 40 people because I had decided that my own life was worth more than one more comfortable evening of being robbed. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Protect the people who deserve it, but never confuse being used with being loved. Learn enough to see the trap before it closes, and when the moment comes to choose yourself, have the spine to do it even when your hands are shaking. I drove home that night to a quiet house that was entirely mine, and I have never once regretted the bill I paid to get there.